Hey everybody, this is Monique with Made with Accuquilt, a friendly support group, and this is part 3 of the series I am doing on applique. So this morning, I'm just going to fuse down my pumpkins. I cut some new pumpkins because, as you know, I use my other ones for my skeleton, and so I just wanted to show you how I go about that. So I've cut my background fabric. You would cut your background fabric according to the pattern that you're making. You could cut it a little larger if you want to compensate for stitching them down. Sometimes that shrinks the background a little bit, so if you want to, you can cut it a little bit bigger. I don't usually find it a problem, but just to be safe, you could do that. And so basically, once you cut your background, I'm not actually using these in any pattern, so mine are a little bit off, but I just wanted to cut some. So I'm using light Steam 2, and this one has 2 papery sides. One that I already peeled off to apply the sticky to the back, and now I basically just have to fuse them down. So you just have to follow the manufacturer's instructions. What I like about Steam 2 is that it actually is sticky, so you can stick things down and they don't move, and I can peel them off if I don't like where I've put it. So that's a nice thing about Steam 2. So once you get it in the place where you want it, you would follow the manufacturer's instructions on how to fuse them down. With Steam 2, they want you to use lots of steam and in order to melt the glue behind it. And so I actually got myself a new little iron that hopefully the steam function will keep working for longer than any of my other ones. I have not had much luck keeping the steam function working, and then my irons start to leak. But anyway, so with Steam 2, lots of steam to melt the glue away so that it doesn't gum up your needle when you're stitching. So hopefully this is enough. So I would go around and I would applique down all my shapes, and this is of course really fun. And one little trick I will tell you, if you can't get the paper off, because sometimes you saw me just kind of having to work with that, if you use a pin, you can just kind of scratch it lightly over the back of the paper like this, and then it actually kind of helps your paper come apart. And so if you're having a hard time getting your paper off the back of your fusible, try that little trick with a needle or a pin. So I'm going to stick this one on, flatten it down, use my steamy iron to hopefully melt my glue. I know that with some of the other fusibles, they'll tell you keep it in the same spot for so many seconds. So just read the instructions that the manufacturer has put on the packaging and just follow those. Okay, so there's my second pumpkin, and then I wanted to show you some if you were overlapping things, because there's probably times when you want to overlap some shapes. And so what you would want to do is put your background shape in the background. And again, what's nice about Steam 2 is that you could move things if you don't like where you put them. So in this case, I want to put my big pumpkin in the back here, and I want my little one to overlap him a little bit. So I actually think I want to move my pumpkin over just a little bit, and then I'm going to peel the paper off of this one, and I'm going to overlap them just a little bit, just to make it look a little more playful. So I'm happy with that. There's no wrinkles or anything like that, and I'm going to steam it down now, fasten it down. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is because when you go to stitch, you'll want to do it in a certain order. So that's why I'm making some of these samples. And if you're doing something, like the pumpkin, or not the pumpkin, the penguin or the mermaid, they definitely have things that overlap other things. And so it's important to understand to do them in the right order, to put them on there in the right order. And you don't have to steam everything down at once at all if you don't want to do that. Sometimes it's actually easier if you just steam down one thing first and then add the other things, because sometimes if you have complicated shapes, like for example maybe the mermaid's hair or something, you know, it could be a little bit off if you're putting everything on there at once. So if you don't want to do that, don't do it. You don't have to. There's no rule that says everything needs to be steamed down at the same time. So you can just do one thing at a time. It's not going to hurt your shape that it gets steamed over and over and over. I'm going to pop this guy over here, fasten him down, steam him. And one last shape. I'm going to put this one right here and steam him down. Now, if it turns out that you are using Steam-A-Seam 2 and you have not steamed it enough, you can still stitch your shapes down, but your needle might get a little gummed up as you're stitching. And so it definitely helps to use a chrome-plated needle, but you can also use a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip or on a cotton ball and just clean your needle off every once in a while. And that'll definitely help get the gummy off, and then just, you know, change your needle when you're all done. All right, so I have all my shapes fused down now. And probably I did not even steam it enough yet, because I know that Steam-A-Seam is notorious for needing a lot of steam, but I am not even going to worry about it. So I have my shapes all stitched down, and now I'm going to meet you over at the sewing table. Okay, we are back at the sewing table, and I just want to point out a few things. So I have my shapes all applique down here. And then I have some scraps of fabric, and I like to fold them double just to give them an little bit extra weight. And so what you want to do when you are about to stitch your shapes down, you want to choose what stitch you want to use. And there are lots of different stitches, especially if you have, you know, a fancy sewing machine that has 550 stitches, if not more. But I would recommend that you start with either a straight stitch, a zigzag, a blanket stitch, or a satin stitch, which really a satin stitch is a close zigzag. So I would recommend you start with one of those. And you might wonder why I say straight stitch, but a straight stitch you actually would use, and you would stitch right inside the applique shape, so not going to the outside, right inside. And I like to use black, and I actually like to go around and almost like draw on my shape. I find it looks more modern. You do risk that the edge might start fraying eventually if you don't have it stitched down right at the very edge of the fabric, of course. But I like the way it looks. It definitely has a place in some patterns and some quilts, and so it's something that you could play with. I find it's really fun to do. Other than that, zigzag is a really good choice. I find that that's probably the most forgiving. Satin is also fine. Blanket stitch is going to take a little bit more practice. And that what you have to remember to do is that you might have to use a stabilizer on the back of your fabric. I find that if I put my hands around it like this, I can prevent my fabric from being sucked into the throat plate, but that's usually what starts happening, is that you're doing close stitches and your fabric just wants to go into the throat plate. And so if you use a stabilizer on the back, and you could use something like this, Sulky, Tear Away, Tear Easy, there's tons of stabilizers. You could even use batting, some thin piece of batting. You know, that it'll just make your quilt a little bit thicker where you have the extra batting when you're done. But it's up to you. I think probably I would recommend you try some with stabilizer, especially for your first try, so you're not frustrated. Okay, and so what you have to do in order to use any of the stitches that I talked about other than the straight stitch, you have to make sure that you use a throat plate that will accommodate your stitches. So I've switched to my wide throat plate. I think this is 9mm, so that I can do zigzag, I can do satin, I can do my blanket stitch. And then I've also switched my my foot to be 20D, and as you can see, this one is nice and wide, so it allows for the wide stitches that I might choose. I cannot use my straight foot because that would break my needle. Well, my machine won't even let me do that. So, but just make sure that you use the appropriate size foot for the stitch that you're going to choose, because you don't want to break a needle. That's not a great place to start at all. So once you have chosen your stitch and you've installed your appropriate throat plate and your appropriate foot, then you are ready to start stitching. And the reason why I like having these scraps of fabric here is because I like to match my stitch width and length to my applique shapes. So if I'm appliquing something huge, I will make my applique stitches bigger. If I'm doing something small, I want to make them smaller. And I might even change the size on the same piece of fabric. Maybe that's a no-no, but I will do that because there are no quilt police and I can do what I want. So on this one, I might choose a slightly bigger stitch on the big pumpkin and a slightly smaller one on the small pumpkin. All right, so I'm just going to show you. Oh, another thing that I want to talk about is you can choose to match your thread to your applique colors or not. And so like I told you, if I was doing a straight stitch, I would probably use black because it's going to look like somebody drew around it with a pencil or a marker, and I like that look. But if you don't like that, you could use any fabric or any thread. And so I have my big spool box here, and I have lots of colors in here, so I would, take my appliques and see, okay, which color do I think would go well with this? And these are just regular, whatever weight, 50 weight spools of thread. Ignore these. These are 12 weight. They're just in here because I ran out of room. So I would probably choose this one here to start appliquing with because it matches pretty closely to this pumpkin here. And if you don't have the correct color, you could use off-white, white, brown, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And I actually like it sometimes better to use something that's slightly off, so don't worry about it. And another thing that I want you to know is that I know that they recommend that if you're sewing on 100% cotton, you should use 100% cotton thread because polyester might wear through the cotton. Well, I don't think my quilts are going to last that long. I really don't think it's going to be a problem. So I really do not worry about matching my type of thread to my type of fabric. And so you'll see here that I have a whole bunch of these spools that I was able to, Coates and Clark, that I was able to pick up for really cheap at my reuse store. And I have all those different colors. And if I see a color here that matches one of my applique shapes, I'm going to be using it. So that is just my personal belief. I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think my quilts are going to last that long, that my thread's actually going to wear through the cotton. And so, you need to do what you feel would be best, I guess. If you're making an heirloom quality quilt that you want to last for 300 years, maybe you want to stick with your cotton variety of thread. All right, so there is that talked about. And then I'm going to show you some of the different stitches that I have talked about. So I have my correct foot, my correct needle plate, and so here I have some pieces of scrap fabric, and I actually found some of this paper. I have no idea if it's going to work or not, but I'm going to use it. Okay, so first I am just going to do a regular straight stitch that I might use, for the modern look. Now I'm going to use black thread on all my samples just because I think it'll be easier for you to see. I know it's really hard to see with my light from my machine shining down on here. And so when I'm showing you in detail next week how I'm stitching, I will try and make sure that it's really up close. But for now, I'm just going to do the stitching, and then I'll hold it up to the camera so that you can see what I did. I forgot to do everything, or I remember to do everything except for tell my machine which throat I'm using and which needle I'm using, which foot, and it really doesn't like it when I don't remember to do that. All right, so I'm just going to do a regular straight stitch, and and then I could have a look at it and say, oh, I like that, or no, it's too big, or no, it's too small, and then I could make adjustments, you know, to make it a little smaller, whatever I think I might want to do on my actual applique. No, I think that's too small, so maybe I'll make it really long. All right, and I'm just going to stop that there, and then I'm going to show it to you what I do. All right, so here you have my straight stitching, and I've tried a couple of different lengths of stitch, and then I can decide which one I like best. Can't really tell there's much difference, but you can tell on the back. You can see the little pin dots. All right, so that would be the straight stitch. Now, like I said, I would not do probably a zigzag with black thread, but I'm gonna do it in black so that you can see it really well. So I'm gonna do a zigzag now, so I have to change my setting on my machine. And see how I'm still, even though I'm using paper, I'm still holding my fabric a little bit taut so that my fabric doesn't want to get sucked into the throat plate. So I think that's a really big zigzag, so I want to change it. I want to make it a little shorter, a little closer together. So I'm just adjusting it on my screen. And I think, oh, that would be a pretty good size to use on my pumpkins. All right, so here you have my zigzag. Hope you can see that. I will put this in photos too in the blog post. Okay, so now a satin stitch is basically a zigzag but really close together. So let me adjust my, I want to keep that longer, I want to make these short. All right, let's see what this works like. All right, I'm going to hold it. Yep, that looks good. And this, of course, is going to take a lot of thread, and it's going to take a lot of patience, because when you do those really close zigzag satin stitches, that takes a lot more time and a lot more thread. All right, so there is my satin stitch. I hope you can see that. And finally, I'm going to do my blanket stitch. And my blanket stitch, I always have to remember where it's hiding. I do use it, but I actually have a little cheaters thing in my, although it's not, oh, here we go, 13. There we go. Use this one. Yeah, 13.09. All right, so this is going to be my blanket stitch. And if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can just adjust it. And I wouldn't adjust it while I'm sewing. I would adjust it while my needle is stationary. All right, I'm going to stop that one. And I'll show it to you. Okay, so there is my blanket stitch. I hope you can see that. So basically, those are your 3 stitches, or 4 stitches, sorry. I don't consider it a straight stitch a stitch really, but I would recommend it. You could start with any of these for your first project if you've not done applique before. I think zigzag is going to be the easiest, but you should choose what you want, and definitely get out some scraps and try them. And so for next time, I didn't want to make this video too long, and so I don't want to actually start stitching my applique shapes, because I really want to focus really, you know, closely on those, and I might need my husband's help to hold the camera while I'm doing that, and so that you don't have the glare from the machine. So for now, just go ahead and get your shapes fused down on your background fabrics, and then find your thread if you want to have matching thread or close to matching thread, and maybe find some stabilizer. And just play around with your machine and try the different stitches and see which one you like best, so that next time I will cover how I applique, what you want to do with your needle, and where you want to stop your stitches. And I'll cover all that in the next video, and that'll be our last video. All right, let me know if you have any questions.